Hello and welcome. Welcome to Birth of a New Dimension. My name is Aurora. I will be your host. I am also the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. So I also introduce myself in case you are tuning in for the first time and tell you a little bit about who and what I am and why I have this information to share. So I am a galactic walk-in. I am not the original inhabitant of this physical body. I came into this dimension and this earthly experience of having a human form on October 8th of 2001, and the interdimensional portal through which I traveled is called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. So I named it at the moment that it was created, and chose the name because the edge of the lasagna sculpture is curly in the same way that the edge of a lasagna noodle is curly. So, first of all, if you do not know what a flying rainbow lasagna looks like, but you would like to know what one looks like, please check out my website, flyingrainbowlasagna.com. That's lasagna with an E on the end. Or you can also simply refer to the banner at the top of the UCY show for this. You can also see on the UCY page for Birth of a New Dimension, the Facebook feed is linked in with this. And that is because I tend to be a person who uses visual cues in order to speak and share ideas. And it's very challenging to share some of these ideas on the radio using only the power of voice and sound vibration and without being able to use drawing and visuals in order to share information. So I have prepared a simple diagram for today because, get ready. Definitely pull on your rubber boots and be prepared for any kind of adventure, because we are going to be building a dimension, building the universe from the 0th dimension onward. I spoke about this in previous recorded broadcasts, and I do not disappoint. So today, against all odds, we will be discussing the multidimensional view of the universe. This is crucial stuff. This has everything to do with preparing your individual consciousness for connecting to consciousnesses from the much larger galaxy, or as being part of the much larger universe. So the idea is that you, as an individual corporeal human, being who wears a third dimensional bio bodysuit and is submerged in the fourth dimension, which is time, you have your own particular viewpoint based in your experience of this realm. And there are larger areas that you might not perceive directly, but which are absolutely affecting your realm. And these larger areas comprise the other higher dimensions. So if you check out the Facebook feed, you will look at my fantastic, super high-tech diagram that I drew just for this. I'm joking because it is actually an incredibly low-tech, stick figure-esque rendering of the dimensions of the universe. But it's rough and ready, and it's enough for us to be able to have something to refer to, and so that we may all be on the same page. Because in order to speak with and or effectively communicate with beings who are higher dimensional beings, it is necessary to know a little bit about the landscape, or the way that the multidimensional universe is structured. So that way, if someone says, well, I am a 7th dimensional being, that we will know what that means. And also to understand some of the communication gaps that occur between beings that are submerged in the 4th dimension, having an experience of time, aka you and I, and many others on Earth, and hyperspace beings, who I describe my spirit guides as hyperspace beings. And often our viewpoints and experiences of this life here do not mesh, because I am experiencing the flow of time. I am submerged in events. And my hyperspace guides perceive time vastly differently, and they see events differently. And so they might say, this is also why I do not give predictions about the future, and I do not listen to other people's predictions about the future. No offense to anybody who is making their vocation or their avocation part of predicting events of the future or telling people about what's coming in their future life. But I will tell you that as soon as you make a comment about the future, you're changing the very future that you were predicting. So, my spirit guides, we often have this argument. They will say, blah, blah thing is going to happen on next Tuesday. Next Tuesday rolls around, blah, blah thing doesn't happen, and I call them on it. I say, hey, I thought you said blah, blah thing was going to happen. And they say, when we told you that, that was truth. However, the higher dimensional world is a constantly shifting, ever-changing mosaic of possibilities and probabilities and then experienced outcomes. And that before reality became an experienced outcome, it shifted. And so this is what makes life very challenging between myself and my spirit guides. And I have had this conversation with other people who also have their version of spirit guides or higher dimensional perspective beings that, also interact with them in their lives. And this is a common problem, a commonality. So another common problem is, and then I'll get into the dimension building, don't worry, but it's fun to share these issues. Another common problem is time scale. So for a galactic being, if the length of your lifespan is 13 billion years, and I am exaggerating, I'm using a bit of hyperbole, but if your time scale is billions of years, then to say that something will happen soon could mean, within 1 million years. 1 million years is not very long in the cosmic time scale, in the grand scale. But 1 million years is clearly a very long time to a human scale and an inordinately long time to a fruit fly. So we must be on the same page here. Oftentimes, if my spirit guides say blah, blah thing will happen, quote unquote, soon, then I always say to them, well, hey, how do you define soon? Are we defining soon in terms of human terms, or are we defining soon in planetary terms or in galactic terms? So hold on one moment. I just need to pause this recording. That was technological difficulties, but we have it all resolved now. So what a great opportunity for me to segue right into talking about building a multidimensional understanding of the universe. So if you check out that super fantastic diagram that I drew, you'll see that they're numbered 0 through 8. There are several different line drawings. In the upper left-hand corner, you will see a 0 and a dot. So we are beginning here with the 0th dimension. So we're starting with nothing, but this nothing actually is the container that contains everything. According to science and the current holders of the cosmology of this time and place, used to be the scientist priests were the class that would hold the cosmology or the story of how the universe began. And in this time and place, scientists are our scientist priests, and they give us our understanding of how the universe began and where it came from. So to give you another example, to the ancient Maya, the scientist priests gave them the understanding that the world came about from Xibalba, and that Hunab 1 and Hunab 2 were these first twins that created the world. I'm not an expert, I'm paraphrasing, but you understand. It's the mythology that says where the world came from. So in this current time and place, our scientist priests give us the mythology that there was a thing called the Big Bang, that at one point, all matter and energy in the universe was compressed into a tiny, 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 incredibly dense molecule. And that molecule, or dot, is the singularity. Called the singularity because there is only one of it. Literally, by definition, there is only one of these things in the universe, and it is a dot that comprises the presence of everything. And when we're speaking about a hyperspace or higher reality space, we are also talking about timelines and possibilities. So you must envision not only taking this Earth and all the planets of the solar system and all of the stars out there and all of the cosmic dust and gas and comets and everything else that's flying about and cramming it together into one tiny little molecule, not just all of the molecules of this timeline and this possibility, but every single possibility that ever did, could, or would exist. It is an incredible spectrum of possibilities. Literally, it's the whole egg. It's 360 degrees. It is the whole shebang. So important to note that it is not just the presence of all matter at this big shebang. It is the presence of all consciousness. It is consciousness and awareness that has not yet been spread out and disseminated all into the vast reaches of space. Space hasn't been created yet. So this is the 0th dimension. We could also call it God consciousness. We could say that this is the source or divinity, because literally it is the presence of all information. It is the presence of all light. If we could say that light is analogous to data or information in the same way that a fiber optics cable carries light, it carries data, so too does light, the physical light that we see, and light that is the light of consciousness, carry data. And this 0th dimension is the container for all data. It is like sitting on top of the biggest library of the world and knowing everything all at once. And not only knowing everything about that realm, but knowing everything about every single realm that could possibly ever exist and everyone who's ever lived there and anything that they might ever experience. Amazing, amazing, exalted position. This is the starting point. The real magic happens in that critical inner self-realization that makes any piece of energy that is a part of the totality, which is the 0th dimension, ever step away from the 0th dimension and create the 1st dimension. So if you're looking at my fabulous diagram, you're now referring to the box that is labeled 1, where you will see a simple line that is a point at either end and a series of connecting points in between making a line. In order to create that 1st dimension, there had to be that quantum leap, that leap of consciousness, that God or divinity or source or totality had to at one point have the idea and just even have the conception of what would happen if. What would happen if there was a little piece of me that wasn't here with me, that was somehow somewhere else? But wait, that's not possible. I live at the singularity. I live at the infinity point. I am everything. I know everything. There's no place else other than me and this molecule that is the presence and totality of everything. That's not possible. Somehow the totality had to imagine and stretch its muscles of imagining to be able to encompass the concept of not me and not here. And in that moment, consciousness was able to take one little tiny baby half step in any direction. It doesn't matter which direction you go, there's really nothing else that's been created. But in the act of taking that little step in any direction away from source, a whole new dimension was created. So first of all, we need to get away from the characterization that we currently have because we're submerged in density and because we are on this journey of consciousness, that moving away from source is inherently evil. This is not true. Many evil people have chosen to direct their consciousness away from source and away from the experience of being divinely connected to source, but that does not necessarily mean that the act itself of choosing to step away from source is a negative act. So this is what I talk about. I talk about this in my class, Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. The idea is that one must not cast aspersions upon personality characteristics as being themselves somehow inadequate. That all personality characteristics serve the totality in some way, if you never had any tendency programmed into the totality, if you never had any of the personality characteristic that was the explorer, who said, I know that this place here is this, but I'm interested in finding out about things that are not here, or what are places that are not like this place. That personality characteristic is very valuable. If it never existed, that little zeroth dimension would never have that leap of consciousness or that desire to explore the world that is not it, that is not itself, to find other or to seek experiences that lie beyond the totality or beyond merely oneself. So breaking away from the source consciousness was a necessary step in development. And I'm talking about development of consciousness. This is the primary ray of consciousness that I am describing here. So you as an individual, I as an individual, we are diffractions of that primary ray of consciousness in exactly the same way that a beam of light from the sun is diffracted through a prism or through a crystal, and it is arrayed outward into the beautiful colors of the spectrum that we are familiar with. Well, all of those colors of the rainbow add up to white light, the primary ray of consciousness that comes from the sun. It is the same thing with our individuated consciousness. You and I, our individuated consciousness, we are a diffracted element or ray of the totality of consciousness. And we each have our own individual color recipe. In my color recipe of my consciousness, I have a little bit of this explorer. It's necessary because if you didn't, you would never be motivated to pick up a paintbrush or pick up a guitar or the piano or to try to do anything new. You know, it takes a little bit of that personality characteristic of like, I'm going to explore this, or even a little bit of the toddler. If you've ever done babysitting or had a child, you know about the terrible twos, the wonderful twos, the magnificent twos, where really little tiny new humans are exploring their own will and their own capacity to say, I want to do it on my own. So if you say, can I help you with that? They say, no, I'll do it on my own. I'll do it all by myself. Well, this is very similar to what is going on with consciousness on its journey. Consciousness, you and I, we are on our journey. And source is like, you know, this beautiful parent that is ready to say, oh, hey, let me do that for you. You're having trouble tying your shoes or you can't figure this out. I'll do it for you. And you and I and everyone else who is here on, you know, the surface of the planet having these third dimensional experiences, we are all saying, no thanks, source. I'm going to do it myself. Like, I'm a big girl. I'm going to figure this out on my own. So we are emanations from that primary ray. And we are, first of all, in the third dimension, you know, we are submerged in this density, and we are also exploring that necessary personality characteristic of independence, that I'm going to do it myself, I'm going to figure it out type of independence, okay? So as soon as source and totality and the central consciousness that was in the zeroth dimension had the thought, hey, I wonder what would happen if, you know, a little piece of me was over there instead of all of me being over here. That was all it took in order to create the next highest dimension. So we create higher dimensions by building at 90 degrees to the present dimension. 90-degree angle. I know that you can all envision that. If you cannot envision a 90-degree angle and you are sitting within a room right now, all you have to do is look at the room. Look at the corners of the room, or look at the window frame, or look at any piece of furniture has a 90-degree angle in it. So this will come up later also. So any direction is 90 degrees to the zeroth dimension. And we have created the first dimension. We created a line. Yeah, we're celebrating. We created a first dimension. From here on in, it is simply a matter of following the same steps of creating a new dimension at 90-degree angles. This is how the universe is built. So this is an easy question now, class. I'm going to give you an easy one. And you can tell I'm being fake in my voice there. What is 90 degrees to align to the first dimension? If you've ever taken math or geometry, you know that it's a perpendicular line and it's the second dimension. So if now we are using our powers of our pineal gland and the capacity to imagine in order to envision this, so if the first dimension is a line, or like we could use a pencil to say that it is like something linear, the second dimension would be what happens if you stack up many pencils next to one another. Or if you look at your fingers, if you don't have pencils in your room, look at your hand as your fingers are pressed next to one another. All of your fingers are like timelines, and they are pressed together into the second dimension. We would call it a time plane, okay? So second dimension, also, the way that dimensions are numbered has to do with how many points of reference it takes in order to describe a position within that realm. So the 0th dimension, it doesn't take any information to give the address of where you live. It's like saying, meet me at infinity. I'm sure you'll be there because everything is there. And there's only one infinity. There's only one singularity. It is single by nature. So you don't have to say, oh, singularity, A, or singularity 375. There's only one singularity. I'll meet you there. When we get into the first dimension, it requires one piece of information to describe a position on that line. So it would, if we numbered it, if it was a number line, I could say, meet me at number 1, meet me at number 2, at number 3. When we get into the second dimension, it takes two pieces of information to describe where we are on that realm. So you need to say not only where I am in terms of the x-axis, you also have to say where I am in terms of the y-axis. For non-math people, we would say the left, right, or the forward, backward, okay? So in my fabulous diagram, you are now referring to the box that is labeled 2, and you can see a series of lines stacked up next to each other, and that creates a plane, and it's analogous to pencils or your fingers stacked up next to each other. Okay, everyone knows the answer to this. What is 90 degrees to the second dimension? And the answer is the third dimension. This is an easy answer because we are probably best familiar with the third dimension. We know this dimension the best because it's the one that we actually inhabit. So now we go back to, please open your eyes and look around the room that you inhabit. Unless you're listening to this broadcast in a redwood grove or, possibly driving in your car or something like that, you're probably in a box. Box is an excellent example of the third dimension. It has both length, width, and height. Okay, so if we take a plane, that is what the realm of the second dimension is, shaped like a plane or a flat piece of paper or like a flat playing card. And we go 90 degrees to the surface of a flat piece of paper. So it's like if I was a little ant and I was walking on a piece of paper and all of a sudden I developed the powers of levitation and I could levitate off of the surface of the paper, that would be 90 degrees to the second dimension. And if we stacked up enough pieces of paper or playing cards, what we would get is a cube. And if you look at the area of the diagram that is labeled with the 3, you will see a very rough and ready representation of a cube, kind of like a top sheet of paper, a bottom sheet of paper, and the dots that represent the intervening sheets of paper. We are very familiar with cubes because we occupy cubes. We live inside of cubes. We live inside of boxes. And it is part of our perception of the realm around us, and our biological-based perception, like our binocular vision, have had a great deal of impact on the viewpoint that we have in terms of multidimensionality. So we are, you might not understand it because you are so submerged in it, but the experience of being submerged in the third dimension has had a great deal of impact or programming on your preconceptions, your expectations, what you presume, the way you look at the world, how you presume the world to behave is largely based on the experience of being in the third dimension and being in the physical realm. Okay. Now I'm going to ask a hard question, and I'm not being facetious. When people would visit my studio and I would take them through this journey of building the various dimensions, I would say, okay, now the hard question, what is 90 degrees to the third dimension? because now we're getting into a dimension that you cannot point to, a dimension that one cannot easily draw a picture of. But if the visitor to my studio was wearing a watch, or if I had a clock on the wall, eventually I could give a hint. And the answer is time. So the next highest dimension from the third dimension is the fourth dimension. And the fourth dimension is the beginning of time as a dimension. So much like fish are submerged in the clear medium of water that sustains them and upholds them and is totally necessary for their life, but which they might not be consciously aware of because they're always submerged in water. And if the water is pure, then it's not something that one would notice. Of course, if it's impure, it has difficulties or, some kind of dye in it, then you can see it very clearly. So too are you and me and everyone else here in this level of density submerged in the medium of time. In just the same way that water flows and fish live in a river and the water is flowing down the river, or that there are ocean currents that are flowing through the greater ocean, we are submerged in time, and there are currents of time, and there is a flow of time. So now if you look at the diagram, I've got an area right in the middle labeled number 4. And what you see is a cube, like a box, and then a series of cubes stretching back into the distance. So I have used a type of visual shorthand here because we come from this time and place where people are used to sketches and perspective. You are able to understand that the dots that recede into the distance to one vanishing point are meant to represent dots that go into the past. We're talking about receding into the past. So the fourth dimension would be the cube that you're currently occupying, right? Like the box, the room that you're currently occupying. It's 2:18 p.m. Well, you're only going to be in this box for 59 seconds because at 2:19 p.m. you are going to move into a different box. You won't be in the same box. You'll be in a new box. And the box that you used to be occupying will be behind you in this long, I want to say ever, but it has a finite beginning, this long stretch of timeline that stretches out into behind you. It is your past. That these subsequent, we could think of them as train cars, or we could think of them as moments. They are literally the slices of reality that you are experiencing, that your mind and perception knit together into the smooth, seemingly seamless flow of experience that is time. Let's talk a little bit about the phenomenon called persistence of vision. This is what allows movies like, old traditional analog movies to work. So let's even go back earlier than that. Let's go back to like the 1400s in a contraption called the zoetrope. 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 This means wheel of life. And if you could envision a cylinder that spins and has vertical slits cut in its side. And early animators would draw still frames of progressive movement on a strip, like a comic strip, and place it in the inside of the cylinder. Then if you give the cylinder a whirl, when it spins by, the apertures of the vertical slits create a flashing movement, and you perceive the inner drawings on the inside of the cylinder moving by at a fast rate, and it mimics what we have in present day film-based movies, that it gives the illusion of movement. So to a person, in the 1400s, this was almost miraculous to be able to see this. And of course, when moving images were first invented, it was totally impressive to people who were able to see it. They didn't necessarily know that they themselves, the viewers themselves, were the people who were actually adding the movement. That when you watch a movie, this is different than video. This is why I have closely used and chosen my words in order to explain this, but it is different than video, which has a different refresh rate. But film, old-fashioned still film, has 26 frames per second. That means you are exposed to 26 separate little images every second, and it is your mind and the system of your perception. So it's involving your eyes and your brain, and the totality of your consciousness is knitting together these individual still frames and making it look like the horse is running, or look like the car is moving, or look like the person is talking. None of those movements are actually happening. What's happening is you, the viewer, are adding those still frames together and creating a sense of smooth motion. And this is also why early films like from Charlie Chaplin look choppy. They didn't have many frames per second, so there wasn't as much information for your system of perception to work with. Eventually it was optimized, like, 26 frames, this gives the illusion of reality. So now please focus your attention on that magical little diagram. If you look at number 4, you see each one of those cubes, each one of those moments of reality stretching back into the distance is like a single frame of the movie of your life. And you, the viewer, the experiencer, you are the magical glue and the integument tying together these individuated moments into a smooth continuum, or transitioning from moment to moment in a smooth continuum of experience. So, first of all, dimension number 4 is a timeline, one single timeline. But it must be understood that the world is made up of many, many different timelines, okay? So now we are starting to answer the next question. And I'm just going to take a brief little drink. Got my special, wonderful vegetable juice here. What is 90 degrees to the 4th dimension? Again, these answers are very difficult because it's not something that can be pointed to. It is the 5th dimension. So now, if I go into my realm of analogies, the 4th dimension is similar to a loaf of bread. Like, imagine a nice French or Italian loaf, a long skinny loaf of bread, where each slice is a moment of your experience, and one end of the French bread is your birth, and the other end is your other side, your death, the final denouement of your experience. And the bread, where the bread is made, let's say the bakery, the back room of the bakery, where all of the ingredients come together, that would be analogous to the 5th dimension. So if the 4th dimension is a long loaf of French bread, the 5th dimension is the bakery where all of the ingredients and possibilities of French bread come together. The 5th dimension is a realm of uncollapsed waveforms. Again, like, I can talk about train cars and you can at least envision what train cars look like. It is very hard to envision uncollapsed waveforms. I used to use this little analogy type story. If you could imagine that you had ovens in front of your eyes, and that you actually lived in a world that was made of batter, like cake batter, and that everywhere you looked, the ovens in front of your eyes cooked the batter and solidified it into actual cake. So you were actually unaware that you were submerged in a total sea of cake batter where everything is mushy and gushy, because where every place you look, the ovens in front of your eyes actually turn that mushy gushiness into actual physical cake that you can experience. Well, this is very much what is happening, that each one of us has consciousness. Literally, your awareness, the force of your awareness. This is called observership. Even if you speak with an objective materialist and hard-edged scientist, if you speak with them about the issue of observership, this is scientifically measured. One example is called the double slit experiment, and you may also research something called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And these are scientific shorthand for what you observe you are affecting. And all of science, the belief system, is based in the preconception that there is some objectivity, that merely the act of observing isn't changing things. But when we get to higher levels of science, we understand that, wow, just the act of observing an event, like an experiment, changes the experiment. So then how can we possibly say that we have gathered neutral, factual information through our observations when really just the fact that we looked at something changed the outcome? It changes everything, okay? So the ovens in front of your eyes are the force of your awareness, the power that your consciousness has, and has the impact that your consciousness has, and the power that you have to shape reality merely with the power of observership. So the fifth dimension I describe as a place of uncollapsed waveforms. It's a place of pure abstraction. It is not a place where objects even exist as objects. Everything exists as a potential, something that could be. Now you're starting to understand the challenges of you and I and everyone who is a hard-edged, third-dimensional physical creature in the third-dimensional realm, experiencing the flow of time in the fourth dimension, speaking with or interacting with beings who live in the fifth dimension and higher, because those beings occupy a realm that is a realm of pure abstraction. It is a realm of waveforms that have not yet collapsed, or think of it as coalescing into a reality that may be experienced. Very, very different experience and viewpoint of the world. Or if we said like your life, the totality of your life. If your life is like a movie, and we unspooled the whole movie, like still frames off of the movie spool and cut it all up and laid it all out on a big giant table. And if you were able to look at all of the moments of your life from birth to final denouement all at once, that would be more analogous to how a higher dimensional being perceives you. Like we here in the third dimension perceive a person one moment at a time. If I met you right now and you are age 44 in this moment, I would perceive a 44-year-old. I would not perceive, unless I was perceiving multidimensionally, I would not perceive everything that you've experienced from age 0 up to age 44. Like, imagine that as like receding behind you into the distance. It would be like saying, I could see the road that you had traveled. I could see all the steps and all the footsteps that you had taken, bringing you up to that moment and everything that you were up into that moment. And I could even extrapolate or expect, like draw a line moving forward that is the line of expectation of where we could reasonably see your life going. But of course, there's always curves in the road or things that are not able to be expected. This is the higher dimensional viewpoint. When a higher dimensional being looks at you, first of all, you're like an open book. And I'll share with you, there's a lovely movie. I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. It is called Flatland, based on the written material by Edwin Abbott from, it's kind of like early 1900s or end of the 1800s. He was a mathematician and scholar, and he wrote a really interesting little book that was about what the world would look like from the point of view of a person who lives on a flat plane, on a flat two-dimensional plane. And recently, it was made into an animated movie, and I love it, and it brings across these ideas of multidimensionality very, very well, because one of the things that happens is this flat two-dimensional person meets a third-dimensional creature. Yes, the flat two-dimensional person meets a higher dimensional being and wants to fall on its knees and worship that higher dimensional being, and the higher dimensional being says, please don't worship me. I am not any better than you. I am simply located in a different place and have a different perspective than you. This is what we're talking about. It is absolutely crucial for beings that are currently occupying the third dimension and experiencing the flow of time in the fourth dimension not to misinterpret our counterparts that live in higher dimensions for some kind of deity or some kind of demigod, for a seemingly all-powerful being, just because they have greater degrees of freedom. So this is one of the mantra that I repeat over and over. Adding an additional dimension means adding an additional degree of freedom. One moment, gotta have a drink. So this is true in math, and this is true in experience. Like, for example, I mentioned earlier in this recording that a little ant stuck on the surface of a piece of paper only has the two dimensions that it can move in, left, right, back and forth. It can't levitate. But what if it magically got magical powers and then it was able to levitate? Or this is analogous to, in the insect realm, going through the stage of transformation that a caterpillar goes through when it pupates and then becomes an adult and has wings. So for ants that, their adult form does not have wings, but I could have used a different example and then it would have been so airtight. Basically, that creature itself can undergo a transformation of its biology and its perception and behavior, and all of a sudden be able to occupy the next highest dimension. So, to an ant, achieving powers of levitation would be becoming a super ant, like super ant. But to a butterfly, that is the normal stage of development. That is the appropriate next stage for them. And it is the same thing for us as full spectrum humans. If you're interested in learning more about being a full spectrum human, I highly recommend and invite you to join my class, because we go through building dimensions and multidimensional perception to the nth degree and have a lot of simple practical tips about how to apply a multidimensional understanding to your day-to-day and moment-to-moment experience. I don't want to get that much afield, because I want to get at least up to the 8th dimension in this information block that I have for you here today. So the 5th dimension, I have said it is similar to the bakery where the French bread is baked. If we're using the model of moving at 90 degrees, and you can also see in the diagram the way that I have everything laid out, above the 4th dimension is the 1st dimension. So you have the 1st dimension as a line and the 4th dimension as a line. And then one column over, the 2nd dimension is a flat plane. And guess what? When you add up many timelines next to each other, what you get is a time plane. And I would say this is similar to a piece of fabric or a piece of tapestry. So think about this as a weaving together of timelines, because it's not just that timelines sit next to each other, or, if you have your fingers next to each other, it's not just these timelines like this. It is an interweaving of timelines in exactly the same way that threads, like threads on the cloth of your clothing, they interweave and they have an impact on each other. On the diagram, now that your attention is down there, so we have gone from 3rd dimension to 4th dimension is timeline, 5th dimension is the time plane, and then 90 degrees to that is if we stacked up many planes. Just like we did with the 2nd dimension, like a piece of paper or a flat playing card, we stacked it up until we got a cube. Well, we are going to take many of these layers of the 5th dimension, these layers of time tapestry, and stack it up into a thick layer of many layers of fabric, and that is called the 6th dimension. And that is in the lower left-hand corner of the diagram, and it looks like a cube that is made up of many smaller cubes. And those smaller cubes are each moments, or they are each these individuated experiences happening at the Planck length. And the special and important thing about the 6th dimension is that all of these possibilities, the uncollapsed waveforms of the 5th dimension, they have an impact on each other. So the possibilities of one grouping of timelines possibilities. I'm trying to characterize this as a live world that is constantly changing and shifting. Like if you look at clouds or weather patterns, they don't just stand still. They are constantly changing and shifting. So this world of the fifth dimension and higher, it is a world of uncollapsed waveforms that are constantly changing and shifting, and new ones are being created. New timelines are being created, like new threads are coming into the tapestry and other threads are being cut. This is very similar to the ancient Greek mythology of Klothos, Thanatos, and Atropos, the three fates, one who weaves the thread of your life, one who measures the thread of your life, and one who cuts the thread of your life. These are ancient mythological ways and cosmologies of understanding the way that the universe is set up, okay? So the sixth dimension would be, I would call it a time cube. And you can see in the column, it is right underneath the third dimension, which is a cube. Okay, so now you understand the pattern that we are creating here. The next dimension up from the sixth would be the seventh dimension. And okay, so we're saying the sixth dimension is like a cube that is made up of many layers of the fabric of time and space and consciousness. And the seventh dimension would be analogous to the train cars that you experience on your day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience. You move from moment 1 to moment 2. Remember, before we were at 2:18 p.m., but now we're at 2:19 p.m. Well, higher dimensional reality is constantly changing and shifting. So if you look at the diagram, the little place where it's area number 7, and you see, wow, there's one cube in the front that's made of many, many smaller cubes. And then there's another one behind it that reaches back into the distance, and another one behind that, and another one behind that. And this is to show that the present cube, the present version of the seventh dimension, had other versions that were before it, and it changed slightly. So to understand this, I use the analogy of if you're working on some kind of a document on the computer, like, you're writing something like a paper, you're writing a text paper, and you came up with one version of it and you saved it. And then you went back and you edited it, took out a few words, changed a few other things, made it better, and then you saved it again, and then made more edits and saved it again. And then, of course, eventually you have your final edit. Well, in the seventh dimension, each one of those boxes, each one of those cubes made up of many, many smaller cubes would be a version of reality that you saved and then went back and edited things. And when I say edit, what I mean is made different decisions, had the opportunity for different choices. New people were conceived of and born. New ideas, artwork, inventions, and music were conceived of and born. We're talking about the tweaking of and fine-tuning of reality. And this is done all the time by hyperspace beings in divine partnership with beings who are experiencing time. When I begin to talk about raising your kundalini, sun gazing, being in divine co-creative partnership with your own higher consciousness or with Christ consciousness, the universal Christ, this is what we're talking about. It's like saying the sun, solar consciousness, gave you a particular reality. And you were like, hey, you knew something, solar consciousness? This, and this need to be fine-tuned in order for things to be much better down here. And you give that feedback back to the solar consciousness, and then solar consciousness says, I will weave the fabric of time differently. I will send out a different emanation. I will send out a different energy. And this is the amazing artistic interrelationship, or like I said before, co-creative partnership between you and me and everyone else who's in the third dimension, experiencing time, and all of the exalted beings who have a higher dimensional perspective. So I spoke about this in a previous issue of this radio show, that the exalted perspective would be like reading the musical score of reality. You see all of the notes at once, but you don't experience it. And you and I, we are here submerged in time. We experience time. We only experience one note at a time. You know, we are actually here listening to the music. And boy, oh boy, what a different experience it is to listen to and be submerged in the music of reality, as opposed to merely having an intellectual idea or a vicarious experience of a musical score that you can read, but you haven't really experienced. So, higher dimensional beings, they see this world of the fifth dimension and higher, these ever-changing possibilities and probabilities. And guess what? Every time you and I and everyone who's submerged in the third dimension, whenever we learn something new, we are absolutely changing time. You know, by you tuning into this radio broadcast and listening to these ideas, you have already changed the future. This is why I began by saying that it is not my personal practice to make predictions about the future or my personal practice to listen to others' predictions about the future, because the future is an ever-changing sea of possibilities. This is big because I also really want to talk to people here about prophecy. You know, prophecy is not written in stone, and there's all sorts of biblical prophecies and things from the ancient Maya and all of these different cultures. And what really must be understood is that each one of us is the captain of our own fate. You are in charge of your own life, and you are not beholden to any moldy old prophecy or prediction of the future. A prediction of the future, even of 2,000 years ago, has long since escaped relevance. And for, modern people who are, seers and users of their inner insight chakra, and, they're using that. If they look into the future and see a particular event, first of all, that is relevant to them. Every rainbow is perceived individually from the point of view of your own eyeballs. This is like physics, and it's also an analogy for the world. Everybody is seeing the world from their own personal viewpoint and has their own personal rainbow. So you cannot allow other people's perspectives to dictate your reality to you. And also, and I just need to have a little bit of a drink before I'm heading into the home stretch here. The future is constantly being changed, fine-tuned, written, edited, and rewritten. And we have a great deal of impact on the final edit and on what we are experiencing. Far from being passive victims of our fate, we are very much conscious co-creators of our divine experience here. And I have only a few more minutes left. I want to get, I said, at least up to the 8th dimension. So we were at the 7th dimension, which would be analogous to a line, a timeline, or a line that is made up of individual moments or individual versions of reality. But you know something? The version of reality that exists right now is not the same one that existed 2 minutes ago, because you've been exposed to new ideas. And so have all of your whole angelic realm has changed and shifted. And same thing with everyone. So the 8th dimension would be 90 degrees to the 7th dimension. And what this means is we've taken the line, like either a line of pencils and we lined them up to make a flat plane, or one finger and then a flat hand made of many fingers. Well, now we have taken many of these a line that is made up of many individuated realities, and I have lined them up next to one another to create a plane. And we're back to making another type of fabric, except this fabric is a tapestry that is woven out of every single possibility that is comprised in all of the threads of every single thread. I hope that came across and made sense, instead of just being like nonsense words. But if you look at the diagram, lower right-hand corner, you will see a little box labeled 8, and you see cubes at the front of the line, and the cubes all have little versions of themselves stretching back into infinity, and those would be previous versions of those versions. So this is like saying that the term paper of reality, quote unquote, has been edited many times. It's been edited and edited again and saved again, and new words were written and new languages were invented, and it was rewritten in those new languages. This is just giving you a little slice of the complexity of the universe. And we could continue this iteration all the way up to the 10th or 11th dimension if you chose, but really it is an experience that you can continue onward with this pattern as much as one desires or requires. So it's a basic pattern of a point, a line, and a plane. And then that plane is stacked up into a cube, and then those cubes are stacked up into a line, and then those lines are stacked next to each other into a plane, which is then stacked up into a cube, which is then stacked up into a line, which is then stacked up into a plane, which is stacked up into a cube again. So the 9th dimension would be a cube made up of the flat planes of the 8th dimension stacked up, and the 10th dimension would be a line made up of boxes of the 9th dimension arranged in a line, and the 11th dimension would be a time plane made out of the lines of the 10th dimension lined up next to one another, creating this time fabric. Once you begin to even get a glimmer of what this higher dimensional reality is like, you begin to understand that language has to change. When we say like past tense, future tense, or what I'm currently experiencing, all of those, we have to have a new type of language to be able to speak with these higher dimensional beings. So one of the things is, in preparing for higher dimensional contact, not to fall into the caveat or the pitfall of worshiping a higher dimensional being, not to deify them because they are fallible, because there are always new ideas that are being made. There are things that aren't known yet or that haven't yet been explored or understood. And even if a being has an exalted perspective of a higher dimensional consciousness, they don't know everything. And it's really important for you as a third dimensional being to validate and totally accept your perspective as being equally as valuable, equally as necessary. Please do not feel less or lower or diminished in comparison to hyperspace beings, and understand that it is a journey, the journey of understanding, and that we are going to continue on this journey of understanding. So I'm at the end of my show for today. Please tune in next week, where we will continue to talk about birth of a new dimension. Check out flyingrainbowlasagna.com, where you can sign up to be a student and learn more about multidimensionality and eventually transform your donut-shaped or toroidal energy field into a flying rainbow lasagna. Thank you so much for joining me.